Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Early Bird Anime with Meg and Dan.
I'm Meg.
And I'm Dan, and for today's episode, we watched Erased. And I don't want to make a joke, because it was really good. It was just so good, and I loved it so much. It made me have butterfly feelings in my tummy. Before we get into the nitty gritty, we want to point out that we're good with spoilers and everything, but this series, I think I can speak for us both, has affected us quite profoundly. I would not want to spoil it for anyone who hasn't watched it yet. So if you're listening to this, just know we might talk about some stuff, but we're also going to be very cautious in what we discuss.
Yes.
On that note, Meg, take it away. What is the background of Erased?
Well, Erased is a very loose English version of the Japanese title, which is Boku Dake ga Inai Machi, which roughly translated would mean something like the town without me, or more literally, the town where only I am missing. There's a lot of nuance to that title, and that particular line actually does come up a few times over the course of the series. It is a 12-episode anime series based off of an 8-volume seinen manga series by Sanbei Kei. The anime ran from January to March 2016, so it's probably the most recent one that we've talked about, and it was directed by Ito Tomohiko, who worked as the assistant director on famous works such as Death Note, Sword Art Online, The Girl Who Leapt Through Time, a whole bunch of others. And the studio was A1 Pictures, which also did Sword Art Online, as well as the famed tearjerker Anohana. The series was licensed in North America by Aniplex of America, and it was released as it aired on the website Crunchyroll, where it is still available for free streaming, so
Highly recommend.
highly recommend. I really liked the music for this series, and as it turns out, the music was done by Kajiura Yuki, who also did the music for Tsubasa Chronicles, Madoka Magica, and a whole bunch of others. There was also a live-action film adaptation that was released in March 2016, about a week before the final episode aired. There was a lot of hype around this anime when it aired, and it currently has a rating of about 8.7 on both IMDb and MyAnimeList. And just a little fun fact here, the adult version of the protagonist Fujinuma Satoru is voiced by Fujiwara Tatsuya, who played the role of Yagami Light in the 2006 live-action Death Note adaptations, which shocked me a lot. I never would have guessed that. I like him a lot better as Satoru than as Light. Daniel, would you like to give us a quick summary of the plot?
Yes. The story is of Satoru Fujinuma, a 29-year-old pizza delivery man and failed manga artist. His life is rather blasé, except for an extraordinary ability he seems to have to relive certain moments of his life. He calls the ability Revival and uses it to prevent bad things from happening, mostly to strangers, sometimes at his own expense. While it is random, and usually only takes him back a few minutes at tops, he is rewound back to when he was 11 years old and given the opportunity to save one of his classmates from a traumatic kidnapping and murder. Through this revival, Satoru unfolds more of the story of his classmate's abduction, further abductions, and more importantly, given a second chance to fulfill his potential as a friend, a son, and also an inner hero, I guess you could say.
I guess you could say that.
So, Meg, if it's not obvious that we are both in love with this show, I guess it wouldn't say how did you think of this, but what would you like to discuss, I guess, as far as why we like this show so much?
Well, I think first I should say that I've watched the show twice already, the first time when it was airing, and it made me cry a lot. It did a really good job at getting me really emotionally invested in the plot and in the characters. I love the atmosphere. The animation is beautiful. I love the music, and I am a huge sucker for shows that feature nostalgia, and by that I do not mean people talking about old gaming systems. I mean, like, shows where you have a character kind of looking back on better days or looking back on past regrets and having those things in the past kind of lingering over them in the present. And this show is absolutely steeped in that. And interestingly, all the more so because Satoru is actually capable of going back and like reliving that time. And so you also get a weird reversal of it too, where he's like being affected by his experiences as an adult as he's reliving his childhood, and like experiences as a childhood shaping his present. Yeah, I also would really like to get into, I guess, Satoru's character analysis. That will probably take a little while though. So, is there anything that you want to talk about first?
Yeah, I will. Well, you said that, it has great atmosphere, and I definitely agree. And I don't cry at anything, and I didn't cry at this either, but I was very close to it.
Yeah.
This show is really, really like, good at how it set up its tension and how it sort of executed character interactions and relations with people. It was just beautiful the way things were played out, and it really had me emotionally invested. And I don't really get that emotionally invested in shows, mostly like movies and books, of course, but lately I feel like there's been a big disconnect with a lot of newer material. So this, when I found out it was only made about almost a year ago, I'm really happy. It makes me hopeful, which is funny enough a motif in this show, where
Yes.
hope is painted on the back wall of the classroom. But yeah, like you said, nostalgia is an interesting way of putting it, and it's not even like, do you remember the days of blah blah blah? Like there was one point where one of the Satoru's classmates was talking about like Dragon Warrior or something and the Nintendo Entertainment System. And it made me
Right.
feel a little like warm and fuzzy. I'm like, oh man, they're talking about Dragon Warrior and what games to buy. And it reminded me of like when I was a little kid and be like, everyone had Pokemon and would sit on someone's stoop and all like talk about and stuff like that. But it wasn't a nostalgia necessarily built on that, like you were saying. It is sort of to what to me nostalgia really is, which is almost like a regret of what you didn't do, or sort of fondness, about bittersweet fondness of what you did do, the lost days of now versus the old times. And it was really interesting, and I loved almost everything about it. And I would not like to delay any further. Let's talk about Satoru as a character, if you would like to take it away.
I have a lot to say about this. He's such an interesting character, and you wouldn't necessarily think it from episode 1, where he's kind of blah.
It was a very neutral episode, I thought. And I was like, this show isn't really doing it for me at the moment, but I stuck with it at least, and then
Yeah.
I was so happy I did.
He's really indifferent. He has this power of revival, and he uses it in the first episode to save like this little kid from getting hit by a truck, and he ends up getting into a car accident and ending up in the hospital because of it. Not with any major injuries, but his reaction to the whole thing is, "Ah, man, it really is better to just not get involved with other people." And that's such an interesting kind of thing for him to say, because if he has this power of literally being able to go back in time and fix things that go wrong, you would think that that would have a really positive impact on him. So it kind of makes him come off as a little maybe self-centered or apathetic. But then when you watch through the whole series, you can kind of understand why he's like that, why he's so isolated and almost lifeless in episode 1. Because and this is stuff that's talked about in episode 1, so this isn't a really big spoiler, but when he was in like 5th grade, he was 10 years old, a couple of his classmates were kidnapped and murdered. And this neighborhood guy who used to hang out at the park, loner, like teach kids how to make paper airplanes and stuff, who Satoru considered his friend, ended up going to jail for the murder. And he was pretty distraught at this. He was convinced that this guy had not done it. Nobody believed him, and the guy ended up getting put on death row. And his mom and the teachers at the school, the neighborhood did their best to kind of hush up the incident so their kids wouldn't be like freaked out about it.
Yeah, tried to make them forget. Really, she was saying no one should live life remembering this sort of stuff. It was a line that was like that. It was very protective.
And Satoru has clearly managed to kind of shove that back into the depths of his subconscious, where it's not really something that he remembers. He has to be reminded about it. But in the brief flashback you see, he was really affected by this. He was, begging with his mom, pleading, "I know this guy didn't do it. And, I saw this girl in the park the night she vanished. If I had just said, 'Let me walk home with you,' then maybe this wouldn't have happened." So he really clearly has all of this repressed guilt that's affecting him and that's keeping him isolated. He's not messed up to the point of being non-functional, but he's afraid to face himself. He's afraid to get close to people. And I feel like the reason he saves people with his revival powers is because he knows it's the right thing, and he doesn't want to compound upon that guilt, but he's not really capable of being happy about it because he feels like he still wasn't able to act when it really mattered.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you were saying, in the first episode, he's very boring and very almost emotionless. And that's, in real life, that's almost like the buildup of someone who has a highly repressed problem. And that's exactly what it is. You see that flashback and he's like in tears, like you said, pleading with his mom. I know this guy didn't do it. And the mom was like, we're going to try to make him forget. It's kind of like Tommy. He's like, you didn't see anything of this. You didn't hear any of this. And you're not going to speak any of it. And the world will be better. And it's affected him. And in the end, like, it's still in there. Like, he hasn't forgotten it. You can never truly forget something. It's still lingering in there. And it even included one of his close school friends. And I was surprised at that because it didn't really seem like he was affected that much by the friend's kidnap and death either, when he first brought it up. So you do really, because you start off on such this low note, almost completely without emotion, except for his desire to save people with a revival, and maybe his anxiety, you'd call it. He starts almost off at like a zero playing field. And then when he goes back to when he was 11, you get to see the rise of him and see, oh, he actually does care about this thing, or he actually has this great aspiration to be a hero because his favorite TV show is like it's not Power Rangers, I can't remember what it's called, but Captain Go-Man, I think it was something like that. And he has this mask hanging up on his wall. That's a common thing that always comes back in his head, is this figure telling him what it is to be a hero and all this stuff. And he actually has these dreams and aspirations, and you realize that the present day is like, this is the failed Satoru.
It's the bad end for him.
This is the bad end, yeah.
And it's so interesting because when he gets his second chance, Satoru seems like he falls really well back into the role of a 10-year-old. And I feel like the fact that he's so capable of just being a 10-year-old again so naturally, because if I was suddenly thrust back into my 10-year-old body, I'd be like, oh my god, like, how do I child?
Yeah, that was one of the anxieties I had about this show, like, investing in, like, as far as my emotional investment was, like, if I went back to being 10, I would probably just be panicking and be put into, like, therapy or something, put in an asylum, because I'm like, I'm 22 now, I can't be 10 again. But I'm now thinking about it.
I feel like that really shows the fact that these incidents really heavily stunted his growth as a person.
Yeah, exactly.
And like, this revival is not only his chance to save people's lives, but also to like fix the thing that messed him up so badly as an adult. And he experiences more growth in a month relived as a child than he did in 18 years of physically growing up. And you can see it in the way he comes out of his shell and bonds with people and learns how to like accept the offerings of help from his friends, instead of just keeping everything bottled in and trying to shoulder everything himself. And it's so beautiful because, oh my gosh, I love seeing that character development, because he was definitely someone who was so isolated and kept people at a distance. And, you know, even originally as a 10-year-old, he kind of held people at a distance and didn't really give himself the chance to get close to him. Or, yeah, close to them.
Definitely. It adds to the heartwarming elements to it. And especially knowing, okay, he has these established friends, but then he's trying to save this girl. He's trying to be her friend too.
Yeah.
So you get the joy of seeing friends that are already together really bonding. And a couple times it's mentioned by the other friends, like, it's like, you've really changed. And I really like the new you. It's like you have conviction. And then you get to also see the joy of making a new friend and seeing the impact that you extend to someone who has no friends. And it's just, you know, you got to keep a box of tissues nearby. That's all I'm trying to say.
Definitely. Like his relationship with Hinazuki, the girl he's trying to save, it's so heartbreaking and beautiful and just sweet and innocent. And like, there's so much desperation and hopelessness, but then also hopefulness on the other side, because you know, he's trying to stop this girl from being murdered, and you see this poor, like, abused child finally being shown affection and being shown love for the first time in who even knows how long.
Yeah, she's blossoming as a human being, and actually, she's very reserved and quiet, but she actually has this little funny personality. Like she always says this when she's a quiet, reserved person too, but she always says like, "What are you, stupid?"
Uh-huh.
But then that starts to become like a term of endearment, and she's like she giggles when she says it, and but she also adds afterwards like, "I really appreciate blah blah blah." And
Yeah.
when you think about it, it's like he's trying to stop this girl from being murdered, in a sense, giving her life again. But he does certain things. He's like, oh, 19 years ago, I went up to this mountain alone and saw the Christmas tree and the foxes, and that was just me, and no one believed me. But now I brought Hinazuki here with me. Like, how come? And you sort of, as the audience, realize like he's getting life too. Like
Yeah.
through his saving of another person, his life is being saved too.
Definitely.
And there's just a lot of pureness, I guess I would summarize the show as. It's very pure, and the relationship they have it's a joy to watch, because a lot of shows would be like, oh, these two characters, they're gonna get married and they're gonna kiss or whatever and blah blah blah, but that's never really the main focus of any of the relationships with any of the characters.
Right, which is a good thing considering that Satoru is a 29-year-old in a 10-year-old body.
Yeah, of course, but I mean, like, but
Morality aside.
never underestimate what people will do.
You don't have to tell me that.
We should, I think, move on to some other great characters, because there are some great ones besides Satoru.
Yes.
And
why don't you take this one? And
so, obviously, to have a great show, you have to have a great rounded out cast too. But one of the things I noticed when watching this was that Satoru's a 29-year-old. He's an adult. But I also found it interesting that they picked 29 because it's not 30. And I kind of just put that away in my brain for a little bit. But my brother and I were talking about hippies and how their catchphrase once was like, "Don't trust anyone over 30." And then like it clicked. I'm like, oh, because 30 you're an adult arbitrarily. But then I'm like, I guess that is a figure. Like when you're 30, you're no longer at least young. That's when most people start having families and such. So Satoru is an adult, but he's also not an adult. And then also combined with his 29, his kid self, he is, you could say, a child stuck in a man's body, and now a man stuck in a child's body.
Right.
So you have these sort of these interesting perceptions of adults and children going on throughout the show, which is really cool. And we talked about the one character that gets pinned for the murder, Yuki. He is, I think, he's 22?
23, I think.
When Satoru is 11, he's 22. And you look at that and you go, oh, creepy. He's a creepy man. He hangs around the park and teaches kids how to make paper airplanes. He must have some ulterior motive. I'm not saying that he doesn't or does, but that's your perception.
Yeah, this show is full of like red herrings and stereotypes, and it kind of lampshades those stereotypes to say, what do you think when you see this? And it kind of like plays at your natural biases. Like, Yuki has a stutter and he hangs around the park at the afternoon, so everybody assumes that he's unemployed. And, what do you do when you see older male hanging around a bunch of kids, especially if he's like socially awkward and apparently not working?
Yeah.
You think that he's some kind of pedophile or some kind of creep when, maybe that's not necessarily the case.
I'll even go further. At one point, I thought he was like mentally challenged, because he just seemed very, very awkward, and to the point where like, I'm like, well, he seems to understand kids better, so I thought he might have had some sort of like either learning disability or something. But it just turned out he was just he's just presented as an awkward person, and that's it. And the rest is up to you to decide whether or not you think that's enough to damn him of what he was accused of. And on the other hand, you have this sort of moment when Satoru is in his adult body and he goes through the park, and he has this sort of moment where he remembers Yuki teaching him how to make the paper airplanes, and he sees these kids making paper airplanes, and the kid's like, oh, why won't the airplane fly? And he just bends over. He's like, you got to give him more lift. So he bends the wings and he flies. It's like, hey, thanks, mister. And it makes him feel nice.
And then a couple of women walking by are kind of whispering to themselves, like, what's that guy doing here? Like, isn't he employed? What, like, that's creepy to be hanging around kids like that. And, we know the main character, we know he's not, going to do anything like that. But then you also have the fact that these are women making these comments, and, women are typically not seen as dangerous people around children.
Yeah. And it's just like, now I get it. Like, he
Yeah.
knew, he always understood Yuki. He had a great bond with him. But in his adult form, he's like, this is what it feels like to have. It's like, obviously he has sympathy for him because he doesn't think he committed the murders. But now it's like, I'm feeling a little bit of it when people are making these snap judgments. And that's also a theme that comes about in the show, is believing versus trust.
Right.
And, benefit of the doubt versus doubt itself. And it's a lot of interesting stuff. But getting back to the adults, so you have that, but then you also have, like you were talking about, women, mothers. And
Oh, yes.
Satoru's mom is possibly the greatest mom who's ever been a mom.
I love her so much.
Not to say that she doesn't have faults, but it's within her character at least. But she is a truly extraordinary woman. She allows her son to get himself in trouble because she trusts that he will get himself out. Because it's almost, you could say it's almost arrogant, but she's like, well, I raised you, so I know you can handle it, because if I raised you, you're gonna do everything 100%. But she's such a very heartwarming woman, and lots of love. But she'll let her son make the mistakes or decisions, you could even just say, whether or not it's for him to decide whether or not they're a mistake. But she's not an invisible mom.
Hardly.
She is present, but he doesn't know it. So he still has the feeling of, I'm doing all this by myself. And a lot of it he does, but she's still making sure that he's not gonna, like, cap someone's knees or something.
Like, he's sneaking around doing this and that, and she knows exactly what he's doing, even if he thinks she doesn't. I love the way their relationship is written, because, they kind of tease each other, and she kind of nudges at him, but, like, it's so clear through the whole thing that she really loves him, and, like, she's really attuned to him. And, even if she does make some mistakes along the way, she trusts him so much, and she always does, like, what she feels is right.
Absolutely. And there are points throughout the series where you even get, between Satoru and her, it's heartwarming. And then you see her interactions with other characters, that's even more heartwarming. Like the girl that Satoru meets that works at the pizza place, and she makes curry, and then the girl's like, your mom's such a cool person.
Yeah.
Or even later, at some point in the series, like, she meets Hinazuki, and she was like, you want to, like, it's like, you need a bath, and she's like, let's bathe together. And then she's like pretending they're at the hair salon and stuff, like cute little things like that. And it's times like that you realize that that there is goodness in the world.
Yeah.
And it's just like, this is just such a lovely collection of people. But you have these radical ideas of creepy, good, and bad, but it's still up to the audience to decide. I think the show definitely is leading you to say that Satoru's mom is a good person. Definitely.
Right.
But I think that's because she's foiled by someone who's a bad person, which is Hinazuki's mom, who is,
very bad mom.
Very abusive and doing criminal things pretty much to her daughter. But
yeah, I would say so.
But you have these very stark contrasts. So that's a good contrast to have for a definitive character, but still making up your mind. But you still have the rest of these adult figures who we won't really go into, but it's up to you to decide. Oh, I trust him. Why do I trust him, though? Is it because of his title, or is it because he smiles and he's got a face you can trust or something?
Right.
It's like, what is it? Like, along with the red herrings, it's up to you to decide who's suspicious, of whatever. Who's suspicious of killing these kids? Who's suspicious of just being suspicious?
Right. And one of the criticisms is that it was kind of easy to kind of puzzle out who the murderer was, and we won't really get into that. And like, it's kind of hard in this case because it's such a small cast of characters.
Yeah.
That there are only so many people it could be unless you just took some random person from outside of the cast, which is not a satisfying.
Yeah, but I'll say that you're always on the edge of your seat because. And it's great thematically as far as an experience goes, because they talk about trust and doubt. And so you might go, okay, it's definitely this person. And in the back of your head, you're like, well, is it really? Or, oh, so-and-so just did this. Okay, he's got to be it. And then you think, well, how come I let this guy off the hook so easily? Or why am I suspecting him all of a sudden because he did one thing?
Right.
It's almost like it's not as much focused on the experience of figuring out who the murderer is,
Definitely not.
but it's got great mystery elements to it that I think added an extra layer onto its enjoyability. Like, I'd say the first thing you definitely need to take away from this is just how people interact
Yeah.
and maybe this is gonna be part of our conclusion, but it's
Yeah, I
like
think we can start wrapping it up.
it's very rare, I think, that I find definitive things that as a whole have impacted my life to the point where it makes me want to change who I am or make things for the better, you know. Certain books, movies, whatever you're not, you know. And this has to be one of them because you have, and I wouldn't go as far to say that I think children should watch this, but like
It's maybe a bit heavy for little kids.
it's heavy for kids, but you know, it's one of those things that I just want to share with people because it's so beautiful, and I keep
Right?
saying it's pure. It's just so good. It gets a sci-fi category because of the revival element. I didn't really see that, but I do find comparisons to like I make a lot of Slaughterhouse-Five, Kurt Vonnegut comparisons on this show, I think, but it does in a way compare to the time travel aspect of that book, if anyone's familiar with it, being caught between all these times and having to replay these moments, and the concept of free will versus doing things because you know this is how it happened the first time. Lots of stuff
Right.
like that goes on, and overall I found it extremely enjoyable. I found it hard to put down. It's only 12 episodes. I don't like to binge anything, so I usually did 3 a night, but there are times where I'm like, darn it,
I gotta watch the
I
next
hit
one.
my limit. But it was beautiful, pure. That's all I
Yeah,
can say.
definitely. It managed to be both heartwarming and heartbreaking and beautiful and awful and light and heavy, like all of these things that kind of seem contradictory all at the same time. It was so emotional and it had such a fantastic atmosphere. It had great music, great animation and character designs, and I think a perfect emotional payoff. So
Yeah.
10 out of 10, I would recommend it. Definitely go watch it if it sounds like your thing. It's beautiful, and that's the best one-word summation of it.
Yeah, I can't recommend it enough. And I think I'll just add one more thing. I think it's because they knew exactly what they wanted to go for. You know, it wasn't overly sentimental, and it wasn't overly mysteriously driven, and it wasn't overly comedic driven or anything.
Right.
They had not even a matter of restraint. It's just, I know what whoever, you know, team came up with the execution of this, they just knew this is how it's got to be, and
Right.
to throw in things for the sake of throwing things in would just be a disservice to
A great
everyone.
story.
And it's just a great show.
It was nice to get to talk about something good after
For
a
a change.
while.
I know, it kind of makes me feel a bit guilty that I pick all the bad shows, but you know, sometimes I'm gonna pat my own back. Sometimes there's a beauty in the disgusting. But it definitely wants to make me pick things that are actually quite
Good.
beautiful. If you like what we say, or you know, think we need to get to more specifics, maybe at some point we'll do an episode the spoiler episode. I'm thinking where we could just do an unfiltered discussion of it. If any of you would like that, let us know in the comments, or if you hate us, let us know too, so we know how to improve ourselves and be good heroes, like
Woohoo.
Hey Go Man or whatever his name was.
Red Axe. Wait, no, wrong anime.
We are Discount Ramblepants.
And remember, secret hideouts are a testament to manliness.
Goodbye. Thank you.
See you next time.